Good evening. I'm Richard Sommer, the Dean of the John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design. I want to thank all of you for coming out on this rather blustery night. Now, I'm going to dispense with most of our usual formalities, except to remind you about our forum next week, Metropolis and Mobile Life, which I hope will elevate the discussion around transit, traffic, and mobility here in Toronto, and another lecture a week from tonight by the French architect Manuel Gertran. But tonight, I'm very excited to welcome an individual who is really no stranger to the Daniels faculty, Bruce Kuwabara. Bruce is an alumnus of the University of Toronto's architecture program and has been a consistent and supportive presence here over many years as a teacher, a mentor, and a critic for generations of students and faculty alike. Now, if I were introducing Bruce in another city, say in New York City or Boston or Chicago, all places where KPMB is working right now, I might have a slightly easier go of it because many of you will know at least some of the things I would typically say in an introduction, but I don't want to miss some of the major facts. Bruce Kuwabara is a founding partner of the renowned firm Kuwabara Payne McKenna Blumberg. In 2011, Bruce was invested as an officer of the Order of Canada for the indelible mark his work has left on Toronto and Canada. In 2006, Kuwabara received the Royal Architecture Institute of Canada's Gold Medal in his recognition, quote, in recognition of his contribution, quote, to the professional craft of architecture and his and the firm's focus and contribution to public life, end quote. Before co-founding KPMB, he worked for both George Baird and then for Barton Myers. He was the first chair of Waterfront Toronto's Design Review Panel and is a member of the board of directors of the Canadian Centre for Architecture in Montreal. Now, KPMB has won an impressive 12 Governor General medals in architecture for its work, which include the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa and the Manitoba Hydro Place in Winnipeg, where it's, I think, 40 degrees below today. In Toronto, the KPMB's projects include, just to name a few, the National Ballet School, the Gardiner Museum, TIFF Bell Lightbox, and the Royal Conservatory of Music. And these have been, in the minds of many, instrumental to what has been identified as really a cultural renaissance in the city of Toronto. In November of this past year, actually just a few months ago, KPMB celebrated its 25th anniversary with an event at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, whose recent expansion was designed by the firm. This is really right after the grand opening of the new Rotman School. This event marking the 25th anniversary of KPMB's founding was remarkable, not just for the discussion of the firm's work and influence that involved some of our most esteemed critics, architects, and a philosopher, but for how the community that gathered, for the celebration, including many of KPMB's peers in the architecture and broader design and planning community, many politicians, civic leaders, academics, developers, and clients from over the years. Now, I've lived in a number of North American cities with large architectural communities, and I've never experienced a turnout for a celebration of a firm's work that had the spirit and an expression of mutual respect than existed in that room that night. Among the observations made at that event were that KPMB's buildings were urbane, sophisticated, sober, yet stylish, and civic-minded. Now, I think it's important to stress that KPMB is a partnership, and it is very difficult to know who exactly does what, because none of us can be under the table and know exactly what role Bruce Kuwabara or Tom Payne or Shirley Blumberg or Marianne McKenna have played in any given project. And of course, there are many other key players in the firm, I would imagine. Now, one of the great things about Bruce and KPMB's work is how it is pursued in an almost common modern language that allows a signature that is deeper than one individual's hand. What has also impressed me about Bruce and KPMB's work is the thinking and research that goes into it. Its seriousness, if you will. At a recent KPMB gathering, this is not another gathering besides the one at the Rotman School, I was sitting next to Shirley Blumberg and a number of other friends of the firm are at the table, and one of our former students who I think is here tonight. His partner is a dancer in the Toronto Ballet, who was also at the table. So we got to talking about ballet, where she had studied, originally a person originally from Australia, and all the other cities in which she had worked and performed. We got onto the subject of rehearsal spaces, and she expressed a lament at how her company could not rehearse in the National Ballet School because she had practiced there, and it was so well designed from a dancer's perspective. She specifically cited the design of the bar, you know, the piece that dancers hold on to when they're practicing, and how the shape was so well honed and like no other she had encountered in all of her travels. So while she's saying this, Shirley actually explained nonchalantly that she and some people from the firm had traveled all over the world to look at ballet schools and to study these details, and had worked very hard through trial and error to incorporate the finest of these kind of details in the project. So whether we're talking about climatic comfort in the life of an office worker at the Hydra building, or the space of a dancer's body at the ballet school, from the program to the detail in the architecture, this is a firm that is always striving to improve their game and make the best architecture possible under the circumstances. There are important differences that, in their work that some may not notice, except of the kind that I'm describing, the people who are actually using the building and that experience it over time. I imagine Bruce is going to show, are you going to show the design for the Kellogg School tonight? No, okay, well. And I had a few conversations with him about when they were starting that project, and he visited many business schools, but also went to all these emerging creative workspaces in Silicon Valley. And I can tell you that some of the insights he shared with me, having gone on that trip, which I did not have the advantage of, provoked me to actually think differently about the organization of our own faculty. So I've been talking seamlessly about Bruce and KPMB's work really as a kind of collective. Yet to my mind, it is clear that the attributes of urbaneness, sophistication, being sober yet stylish, and always acting in a civic-minded way can just as easily be described to Bruce Kuwabara as they can to the work of KPMB. Bruce is ambitious in his work as an architect, but he is also ambitious for his city and for the broader communities in which he participates. I'm glad that we here at the school, or at this faculty, are one of those communities. With, I think, a relationship of intellectual creative exchange with Bruce and KPMB that is unique. Our students go to work at KPMB. They sometimes come to us as students from the firm. We have drawn faculty from the firm, in addition to Bruce, who's taught here, as I mentioned. And faculty have also come to us from the firm. So when you take into account, as I mentioned, George Baird's influence, there are many forms of collaboration and exchange that have occurred over the years between Bruce, KPMB, and this school. And on a more personal level, I can tell you that in my role as dean, Bruce is always keeping me on my toes, and I'm very happy for his guidance and advice. So for all these reasons, I'm very pleased to have him come to the podium tonight and show us his work and his thinking. Thank you.
Good evening. It's really been quite a journey for my partners and me, and for our firm. We have extraordinary people. I always think that sometimes that the music analogy of playing as a soloist or playing in a duet or playing in a quartet or an ensemble or a small orchestra, or what we have now is a pretty large orchestra of many ensembles and duets and quartets. But generally speaking, architecture is collaborative. There are very few buildings or projects that you can actually do totally on your own. You're always depending on others to make something much better than you might have made on your own. In fact, I remember George Baird gave a brilliant lecture here in this room where he talked about sort of the history of collaborations between some of the really fine modernist architects, and his argument was demonstrated in the work itself, that the work that was collaborative versus the work that they did on their own was actually better. And he gave many examples. George is in Montreal tonight because there's a memorial for Melvin Charney there, and he called me. But I think he made the right choice. But I would say that we all have mentors. I mean, George is one of them. I worked for him and really came to think about architecture differently. He taught here, he lectured in this room many times. And then there was Barton Myers, who's in California. So I've really had the two of them, and in that interplay have kind of opened up and learned to really think differently about the role of architecture in the city. I think for me this is very true, and what it means is that whether consciously or subconsciously, every act of building implies a future in a city, and it implies and suggests and supports or negates a level of relationship that occurs in cities. So much of the history of architecture in Canada has been about the construction of the mythology of nature, and we have such a great big country, and it's always buildings that are in more natural settings. Our practice may go down in history as being one that's been primarily focused on building within cities. And so I find the people that we end up talking to a lot are people like Ken Greenberg, who has had a parallel career, but he has influenced our way of thinking. I tried to organize the work tonight thematically. You're not going to get a lot of detail on any one building. A lot of them are very big and very complex, because that's what happens as the firm has grown, that we've created an audience and a receptivity to the work that's beyond the country, and I think it's really, really what we've always wanted to do. We wanted to build significantly at home, really try to master the way we think about things and how we make things. But I think we were very fortunate to be in Toronto during a time when the intellectual forces that were connecting architecture in the city were people like Jane Jacobs, but I also think that it was amazing to be in the city of Marshall McLuhan. And I always bounce around between the two. I mean, obviously it's the city of David Crombie, it's the city of many other significant cultural figures, but in architecture and the kinds of things that I've really thought about for a long time was that we were kind of incubated in the city where the question of how cities work was on the table almost every day. And then we have, you know, the free agency, the free trade. We lost Bruce Mao, we got Richard Florida. Richard Florida, I think, developed another way of looking at the city. People are critical of him at times, but I think the one thing that he has done is he's made me see the city differently. He made me think about the position of the University of Toronto in this city. He wrote a great op-ed piece in the Globe and Mail where he talked about the centrality of the University of Toronto within the fabric of the city, its connectedness, and then he connected that to the production of intellectual capital and seeing the university as the engine for prosperity. And it takes sometimes someone from somewhere else to actually see where you live, to reconfigure how you think about Toronto as it moved to become the mega city that it is, with all its warts, all of its problems, all of its aging infrastructure. But I think we live and you learn in a city that is a kind of crucible, a kind of laboratory for urban thinking. And that's one of the great pleasures of being an architect and great challenges today. Roger Martin is a great dean. To me, he's great because he elevated the Rotman School of Management as a place of learning based on a set of ideas around integrative thinking and design thinking. Those ideas, which are now much more prevalent because they've taken traction at other business schools, were not always apparent. And sometimes it takes someone to actually frame an idea of education, to actually attract others to support it. So his notion of generating the money that would actually pay for the building was through an idea of education, and I think that's incredible. Essentially, the opposable mind uses Canadian case studies, Izzy Sharp or Pierce Handling and the Toronto International Film Festival, to show a way of thinking that is not either or, and it's I think, quintessentially Canadian to think that you can stand back and look at what's really happening and then come to a decision. You don't have to jump. You might make the wrong decision, and I think there's a kind of measure of thinking that his book talks about that you should read it. It's a great read. Stephen Marsh, friend, critic, very prolific. But he wrote this piece and captured the cover of the Atlantic, and I think it was fascinating because for me it argues almost the way McLuhan talked about when one technology replaces another, the former, that is conversation and face-to-face meetings, becomes a premium. The real architecture becomes the premium. But they don't totally disappear. They can exist simultaneously. We've gone through the period of a growth spurt unlike the city has ever seen before, with more large-scale reconceptions of urban housing, healthcare, the waterfront, major problems of transportation, major problems of thinking about how you balance the future of the city in terms of equity, the three cities, the inequity that exists, and how we rethink that as we design our way to the future. But we were part of the Cultural Renaissance, which was the largest public investment in culture that Canada's ever seen. So it's governments, two levels, but also private donors. And those pink dots are all sitting on the arterial streets of the city and have redistributed value, real estate value in the city on the armature of the 19th century British military grid. And these projects, which you well know, Tom's refurbishment of Roy Thompson Hall, all speak to the question of need, that Canadians, and it was like Richard's story about the rehearsal halls, that we just do not have the facilities, we did not have the high quality facilities that you absolutely need to produce great art and to perform and for education, learning. The neat thing I think about the ballet school is my daughter goes there on, have to take her there Friday night and Sunday at noon as a junior associate. She really doesn't care that I had anything to do with the project. She's just in there dancing away. But these projects, for us, created a critical mass of evidence of everything I'm talking about in our hometown, and we have leveraged that abroad. Jack Diamond's Four Seasons, I go there for a lot of performances and appreciate the fact that we have those facilities, which we never really had before. So these projects have kind of changed the face, and they're one part of the growth spurt, but there's so much more work to do. Marianne and her team with Bob Sims did an incredible job, probably the most loved project in the office, although we had a straw vote in our office and the Gardiner won. And that's why Shirley and I are here tonight. We really like that. Okay, so these are the 7 themes. I'm going to take you through very quickly. There are little video films in each of these. And the first one is reimagining the public realm. One of the things that I've really become very aware of is the fact that we've had the opportunity to design and have built 3 major city halls in Canada. The first one was Kitchener City Hall, which was really about a lot of thinking about the city, that in Kitchener City Hall it was never one building. It was always incredibly heterogeneous, that it had to do with a period of time, the late 80s, when there was a kind of interest in referential architecture and typological space, that the most important thing I said we were making then and Howard Sutcliffe was on that team, David Pontarini was on that team, Luigi LaRocca was on that team, Marianne was on that team. But we said, we're going to make a civic square, and we're going to do it with one building. And we're going to break that building down because I was very interested in James Sterling's Stats Gallery in Stuttgart. We didn't know that there were boat clubs. We didn't know a lot of things about the public, but we did know that you had to make a room that was generous, that had the capacity to hold large numbers of people. And we saw this article, Amanda pointed this out to me today, that in the National Post, which has to do with companies like RIM and Cisco, and how Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge is really this kind of real hotbed. It's really an incredible incubator for Canadian entrepreneurship. And that they are using that city hall. You know, we had to go on radio programs to argue for that skating rink. We won it on a 6-5 vote. People said, why do we need a city hall? So the first essay was really on public space, representation, durability. The second one was teaming up with Hudson Bacher, who did Granville Island, and every architect in the country, Erickson, Seidler, Moriyama, Diamond, they all wanted this project. Jos and I went and we presented based on Kitchener City Hall and Granville Island, basically. And it was a very difficult site in Richmond, which is in the delta of the Fraser River, very high car ownership. The biggest mall in Richmond is off in the upper left-hand part of it. You're on very busy arterials. You can't stop a car. Very few people take transit. And so we, with very few elements, created a scheme that would both present itself to the city on the corner. Those are heritage trees right on the corner. There was another modern 1950s city hall that was actually a terrible building. And a simple building that began our inquiry into sustainability. So this building, unlike Kitchener City Hall, is all about developing the facades of the building to deal with orientation. So on the south facade, you'll see louvers, you'll see balconies that off of office space, which was pretty radical because no one said they asked for them. Stairs that are pulled to the exterior of the floor plate, as you would in a European building. A low linear galleria, which is basically a meeting house that organizes, leads you to the council chamber, which is pretty obvious, but really creates a pedestrian route across the site from a bus station. It's a very hopeful scheme, and it leads you to an RCMP building and other community buildings, community centers to the left of this. And they said to us, we have chosen you because of your experience with Kitchener City Hall. We just don't want it to look like Kitchener City Hall. We want it to be West Coast. And so we were really getting into wood and exposed concrete. Vaughan City Hall was a competition that I told my team I didn't care if we won. And it's an incredible thing when you say that to your team. It releases energies and thought patterns, because I said that there are things about this competition I really think are wrong. So there's Vaughan, the city above Toronto. It's a 27-acre site. There are existing buildings. That's our existing 1980s City Hall, which is coming down, and a senior citizens' home, Maple Manor. This is Keele and Major Mackenzie. And a GO line, which links to Union Station, should be used, and there should be a major station right here. And the whole problem was how you develop a sense of a civic center in one of the most rapidly developed suburban regions, really, of Ontario and of the country. I mean, Vaughan is an amalgamation. It's a mega city. It's an amalgamation of places like Maple and Kleinburg and Woodbridge, and it was some of the richest agricultural land in Ontario. And it was incredible. This map is incredible because you're seeing the long, narrow subdivision of land to the roads that lead to the lake. And it's a beautiful pattern. And so we developed the theme on the team that didn't want to necessarily win the competition, to cultivate a civic landscape. We said that that's the opportunity. This is a landscape we're dealing with, and unlike many of our other projects, which are looking deeply and intensively into that surrounding fabric to actually find the clues, to understand the scale, we said, let's forget it. Let's do something that has a certain autonomy that would stand against the storm of suburbia, where people walking are a rarity. And so let's make a place where you might actually drive to, because that's what people do there. But when you get out, you actually feel like a human being and can walk. And so we started looking at the development of American and Canadian modern campuses. And these are some early sketches. We're reading the grain and subdivision of the land, and we actually came to the proposition, like unlike, say, the representational quality of Kitchener or the sustainable quality of Richmond, that we would actually equally weight the space and the buildings on the site. So we would develop the buildings as loft buildings that would be wall-like and very neutral but very firm, and that we would clad them in clay. We went to a company, very interesting, this is a real Obama story. This is what I thought would happen under his presidency. There was a family in Upper New York State that made clay pots, those classic clay pots, and they did very well. And their children grew up and are making building cladding systems out of terracotta. That's the transformation that I thought would happen in the United States, but at a very large scale. We were very interested in the idea symbolically of taking the earth and actually making the walls of the building and using terracotta. We had seen Renzo Piano's work, which is beautiful, but we actually wanted to use it in a very chocolate earth brown. And so there's a grain. This is the site. There are the buildings that you had to develop a site plan that would allow them to stay in place, and so it kind of divided the site into three. These are the backyards where people are hanging laundry and having barbecues. There's one heritage building at the corner. This was a town. You cannot build anything against the goal line, so it was, I think, a 90-foot setback. And so our scheme was that it would basically be a shaft of space down the middle that would have a square, learning from Kitchener, but Kitchener learns from Mississauga. Mississauga debates Nathan Phillips Square. And then there were two things about the project that the program that we really took issue with. One was they had called for all surface parking, and we said, you won't have a site left. And the second one was they said, you should put it all in one giant building. And we said, no, you shouldn't. You should actually make a series of buildings around the space. It was a very simple but very clear partie. And down the middle is the Heritage House Gardens. We're still working on their master plan, a skating rink that is a roof over underground parking with an island in it, that it would draw people as a big experience against, Canada's Wonderland, and the Promenade Shopping Mall, a square that was intimate as a room. The council chamber is one room among many other objects down the middle, and that you could walk through the scheme from surface parking. There's below-grade parking on one line, and we were hoping that there would be a bridge here to Great Gulf's subdivision and to, hopefully, to the GO line. So this is the diagram in phases. We built this first phase, but I've always said to them, and I'd say it again, that this project gets good with phase 2. There's a library to come. This was our competition model. I said, just fill it with trees. I remember losing Markham City Hall competition when I worked for Barton to Arthur Erickson, and we all had our models together, and ours had probably about, 100 trees on it, and he had 2,000. And if you see it, there aren't 2,000 trees there. So these were the kind of images we showed about the ability to have organic food markets, which actually is good given the history of the site. We had one symbolic tower which has a stair in it that takes you to the council chamber. There were swing bridges to link to the island in the winter. So this is the first little film by Maris Mazoulis, who's happily living in Europe. Just sent an email to us telling us that he's getting married. But he did this film under really limited time, and you'll see an earlier film that he did, but it's about making this a room, an outdoor room, and the terracotta louvers are facing south and west. The council chamber is lifted off the ground plane so that there's an incredible multi-purpose room that takes you right through the building. The buildings that I admire the most are many of them are in Europe, and they're done by architects like that are Scandinavian and German, Italian. We like the work of Arne Jacobsen a lot. I think there are many in the room that do. But we liked his civic work. There was a kind of clarity and a toughness to the systems that are deployed. This building is integrating a high level of sustainability with the most natural daylight of any building we've done. It's more even than Manitoba Hydro. And it has a vibe that I'd say is from the 60s. But it has an openness that actually startles the people who are working in that 1980s building. The council chamber is really a recital hall, and this is the loggia that kind of looks out over the shaft of space to the west. This is an incredible piece of concrete that is cantilevered way out. And both Kevin Bridgman and Goran Milosevic, both graduates of the school, put an enormous amount into this project. It's a very tough project, one that my Italian friends from Europe like a lot, but it's speaking to a period when things were a little bit clearer, and we thought that was really a statement within the Vaughan cultural fabric. And we've had a good discussion about this project with their new mayor, Bevilacqua, who's very much into the experience of space, which is, I think, at the heart of making a walkable city. This project we're doing in Saskatoon, part of the pleasure of the work is that we're able to explore the country through the work and to understand its regions. This project is in a city that's feeling pretty good about itself right now and is growing. And it has Life of Pi author Jan Martel make statements like this. For us, this picture is incredible because of this little red building which stands against nature. It's not nature. It's not curvilinear. It's not organic. It's a storage building, purposeful, simple, clear. And just the short history is that the Mendel Gallery, which is pretty fantastic as a social center, is moving to the blue dot, which is the end of 2nd Avenue, which is near the Idlewild Bridge, and is really part of an area that the city's calling River Landing. There's a farmer's market. This is a giant freeway access that splits, and a building that I think I like a lot in a way because of its enduring image is the Besborough Hotel, which was one of the Chateau Railway hotels, which I think that's the one thing my children and I have in common. We love all of those Chateau, Frontenac, the Chateau Laurier. It's recognizable and it's made out of very limited materials, and so we took some cues from that. And then there is the Persephone Theater, which is already on our site. Our site is L-shaped and wraps around the Persephone Theater, and it has, as every relatively contemporary building in Saskatoon, as a marker of architecture, a sweeping curve. So the convention center has it, you go to the airport, guess what? The sweeping curve equals architecture. And maybe because of that and our resistance to that, we said no curves. Except that across the street there was a proposal for a mixed-use development that was all curves. This is the Persephone. This is 2nd Avenue. You can walk under this bridge, the Idlewild Bridge. There's been a lot invested in that landscape, and it's tiered to the river, and it's all about the river. Moriyama did the long-range master plan for Saskatoon, and it was all about the evolution of the city, the history of the river, the river, the river, and the river. And there were heritage buildings on the site which came down before Shirley and I got out there. And so it was very interesting to us because we had never dealt with a site like this that had so much face time on the water. And so we looked at very carefully and went to the other side of the river and really looked at, for us, were the series of datum lines, horizontal datum lines that dealt with the shoreline, the river line, the lower walkway, the embankment, the upper ground, the upper ground floor, where the ground floor is of the Persephone Theater, you know, the top of its lobby, the top of its fly tower, and Klinkskill Manor, which is a senior's residence. And we were saying, like, what do you think of this? You know, this is the physiognomy of the site. This is the formation of the site we're dealing with. And we were also inspired by some of the art in the collection. That line, this Perahudov, William Perahudov was one of the great abstract expressionist painters in the West, and he was having a retrospective while we were doing this project. And at the high end, we were looking at what we thought was really interesting was a double cantilever of falling water, that it cantilevers in two directions. And we were looking for a solution to a very, very tight site that was L-shaped. So you can't build out here. This is the Persephone. This is an existing roundabout with public art in it. This dotted line is a no-build zone. We're working with Greg Smallenberg, trying to merge the landscape of our building. The front door was going to be here. This is where buses, taxis, and drop-offs would be. There's parking that comes from the top end of the L, and we're wrapping around and basically reimagining the Persephone in a relationship with this gallery so that they would have mutual benefit. And one of our big ideas was to make a ground floor that you could walk right through, so that you might actually, after a day of walking along the river, actually come upon, you know, the art gallery of Saskatchewan and actually encounter art and therefore get hooked. The other thing we did that was really deliberate was always reference that experience to the river. And they wanted that, and we wanted that. But that all the circulation, when you come in, you go to the north. This is a due south elevation. And the elevators are also at the north, so every time you're pulled to the north, always to come back to the water, always to come back to the water. The other thing was that the original collection, because this was hugely sensitive, was the Mendel collection. So the Mendel would be very present on the ground floor at the terminus of the axis of the main entrance. There's a community gallery which opens up on the corner. We took this from the Patkow scheme for Emily Carr. It's fantastic. You should see it. It's on Granville Island. Just the whole corner of the gallery opens. You can cross right through the gallery. But when there's a community gallery opening, it's a group show, and this place will be filled. The cafe is here, retail is here, information, and a big space in the middle, because the history of the Mendel, the tradition of the Mendel, is that it was always a forum to discuss major issues, not just of art, also musical performances. Saskatoon, like Winnipeg, hits way over its weight in terms of culture. It's an amazing place with a university and a great future. All of this is back of house, loading docks, big washrooms, storage, everything you need. And then there's just there's a group entrance for kids and studio rooms back in here. They're subdivided. Okay, so here's the scheme. This is a sketch I did. I basically cribbed my son who was making these wood sculptures, these stacking things at school, and I just said, come over here, come join me at this table, and let's get to work. But this is the organization, so below grade parking, contiguity with the Persephone, a multi-purpose room on the second floor on the Piano Nobile, cantilevered over the main entrance, and the galleries would be organized, the Mendel, the second floor, permanent collections, and then changing collections up. The offices, the administration are way up, and they're abstracted. They're in a floating box. This is the stack of the program. And so this project has Matthew Wilson on it, Matthew Krivosudski, both graduates of this school. It has Paula Rocha, one of the most talented architects that I know. And these are showing the various editing morphs of this building, and it's really all about these interlocking structural steel frames that deal with the long spans that you need for all of the galleries, for the changing and the multi-purpose room. And so when you look at these long tubes of space, they're actually the galleries, and they deal with all the spans for the lecture auditorium. And we're dealing with a kind of expanded mesh to deal with the solar loads on the south, but keeping the view to the water. The ground floor is very, very transparent, facing south, but there's an overhang. It's all the loading, back of house, Persephone, we're swinging around their curved lobby, which joins with our lobby. And part of the challenge was to make both buildings stand side by side while retaining their own identity. You know, the drop off, it's very, very high floor to ceiling height for buses. There's compression, you come in, the information is on the left, the cafe is on the left, the Mendel is right here. These are the Perahudov murals, and as soon as we saw them, we talked about the Modular Man and Le Corbusier, and then we found out that Perahudov and, of course, Corb did Les Enfants studio. And Perahudov was a student. Fireplace, which is very similar to the one at the ballet school. I mean, every project speaks, I think, in a way to other work that we've done. It's natural that you carry forward things and ideas. These are the original 13 and the murals that were in Fred Mendel's office. And then a very high space for music and gatherings, big openings. And then the big stair up to the second floor. This is the lecture hall. Then turning always the views back and to the river. The multi-purpose room is down this corridor out here. So we're going to go down. And we have a wood ceiling that unifies the whole sort of development of the public space up, right up into the office. It passes right through. There's a skylight up above. The expanded steel basically forms a kind of double wall, solar shading on the south facade, where that's interesting because you want that view. Everybody wants that view. It's the thing that orients everyone and actually creates the context for the viewing of art, because they often said this building is where the city meets the water. These are the changing galleries. And you have to really think of smaller spaces. Like the great museums always allow you to break away and to have that moment where you gather your thoughts and you think of other things, or you're doing other things. So this, they said no light, natural light, no Renzo piano galleries, no light, although we'd love to do that. But so we have light in the spaces that you move to beyond the galleries, because for them it was really about the protection of the collections. And this is way up. There's the boardroom, which is a community room, and a big terrace overlooking the river, where you get your bearings and you understand you're in this incredible landscape. And you can see the university from here. The stone below is sometimes contentious. We actually did not choose Tyndall stone, we chose Balder stone. It's harder, it's tougher. We want this institution to be durable, and it's called the Ramey Gallery. It's Ellen Ramey gave $30 million to the building, $15 million to the capital, and $15 million to endowment. So this building will really be great, because it has this idea that is about the sustainability of the institution. It's a hybrid between the city of Saskatoon owns it, but it's a hybrid of a kind of community center, public building, and an art gallery. Okay, transit-oriented development moved quickly. We won in around 2000, 2001, the competition for 3 buildings for Concordia University. It's 1 million square feet. It's the only way we could actually get a project in Montreal. It's not that easy if you're a Toronto architect. So it was an invited competition. We worked with Fichte and Seuferman. And it was really about thinking about Concordia like Ryerson, or Concordia like NYU, which is unlike McGill, which is unlike the University of Toronto. It's a different kind of urban campus. It's a street-dependent campus. The numbers, the volumes of people on St. Catherine and walking on de Maisonneuve, incredible. De Maisonneuve is all expropriated land for the subway. The subway comes into the Guy Metro station in this building on the corner, which we've now reclad. The project was for building on both sides of the street, all connected to the metro, no parking. The decision was to provide 0 parking, and I think it was a fantastic one. And to understand that Rue Guy Street, is one of the major bus transfers points. The buses swing into this like it's crazy on a day, and so we said we have to acknowledge that. They called for a gateway. We talked about a threshold where these 2 slabs, one would look to the river, one would look to the mountain, and the visual arts building would be a stout, boxier loft. We said we're making academic lofts with incredible public space. I remember Ray Affleck coming here and saying, in Montreal, we think about 1 level below ground grade and 1 level above, and you have to get them all activated. And when we were doing this, we were in the land of Ray Affleck, and you should know who he is, RCOP. But here are the buildings. So this one looks to the river, this one to the mountain. So they inflect the angle at the noses of the building. That relates to the angle that de Maisonneuve was placed on, so that we were trying to relieve the face-to-face condition between engineering labs and John Molson School of Business. This is, they're all connected too, which is great. So what's interesting to me about this transit-oriented development was really interested in getting people to walk. So it's got all the same features as Richmond City Hall. The stairs are pulled to the ends of the slabs, but when you're in those stairs, you see the river and you see the mountain, and the floor levels are contiguous, so you could have an engineering degree and visual arts degree, a master's in fine art. And below this is one of the best kept secrets in Montreal, which is Hexagram, which is a co-venture between McGill, Concordia, UQAM, and it's got the most amazing laboratory for, like, there are robotic spiders that are created down there. There are amazing things. It's in the land of Cirque du Soleil, but you get engineering and business. So think about, there's an underground connection between the buildings. There it is there. It's something that Rob Kostelik worked on. But we did this, which is something you shouldn't do, but it's a parallel passage, because the traffic on St. Catherine and the traffic on Bishop and on Guy Street are enormous, and they're all going down this escalator down into the Guy Metro station. So kind of this section is amazing, because we're stacking, like we ended up doing at Hydro, these 3-story, 5 of them, 3-story atriums with classic, let's say, Montreal spiral stairs right off the elevators to try to invite people to walk rather than take elevators. Interconnecting stairs is an amazing proposition of a vertical campus, all connected to transit. This is the first film that Morris made, and he said, well, what do you want me to do? And I said, I want you to go to Montreal and don't film the building as an object. I want you to make a film for us that documents the way in which the flow of Montreal condenses and penetrates our building. And he had made other films. Like, he's worked in Japan. He's worked for Jean Nouvel, which is a whole series of stories. But it was about the way in which cities actually are, where buildings are rarely just kind of, it's hard to see the whole building because of other buildings. This is the public art that Nicholas Bayer did, and you see it on the inside. These are these interconnecting sort of social spaces. This is the parallel passage, which, you know, the visual arts has a gallery along it. It's merited in this situation. It's in Montreal, which is an incredible city. Here's the gallery on this side. It's got glass. It's no different than, say, the path system, except it just feels better. And the volumes of people and the way in which we wanted the interior to feel like an exterior. We used the Wagamama benches. We have robust furniture. This stair takes you to the Dean of Engineering's office. We wanted to be close to the action. Has a lot of friction in it, and you need to make a building that's very robust. And we made these courtyards. That's a sculpture court, for example. And this continuous canopy is for people waiting for buses. This is the way you go down to the subway. This is really a donor wall. Rock climbing over here. This is our fitness center. It actually goes on several levels. And it feels like it's almost outside. That was the intent, that we would expand the space of the street right to this back wall. There are cuts here that drop all the way down to the floor below. There are ramps. There's one continuous bench where people are sitting on all day long. And the public walks through this building. This is where a university building is a gateway to transit. Hybrids. There are many mixed-use buildings. In Toronto, we've done a few that I think are really significant in terms of the way in which the contemporary world works, in terms of the public and private sectors, in terms of commercial and cultural interests. This is the Lightbox, and Festival Tower, and this site, we work here in this building at 322, which is a Mirvish building, you know, which will be, you know, it's the site where Frank Gehry and David Mirvish have proposed the major mixed-use development. This is John Street, King Street with streetcars. This site was a parking lot, had Farb's Car Wash. It was owned by Ivan Reitman's family. And the Toronto International Film Festival had no land, and they put out to the development industry a request for proposals. Imagine, it shows a lot of chutzpah. I mean, that's amazing. They just said, look, we're here. We're the International Film Festival. Make us a proposition that builds us a 180,000 square foot home on your land. And so what people don't understand about this is the hybrid nature and the synergy, because the Toronto International Film Festival owns 180,000 square feet of this construction through a strata title. It sits over 6 levels of underground parking. The Reitman family and the Daniels joint ventured and became King John Development, and they're the master developers. The Daniels really played a significant role. Ivan's family were great, but provided vision, heart, and the site. And a lot of direction. I mean, we presented, Shirley and I presented to Ivan Reitman, and it's just a different kind of pressure. I mean, he's a Hollywood type guy, right? So, and then the corner is retained by King John Developments, where Canteen and Luma is. This was our competition scheme, post-competition scheme. We had a more abstract scheme that hardly had any expression of what the building was, and Shirley and I worked with an artistic committee that had Adam McGoyan and David Cronenberg, Sarah Pauly came to some of the meetings, Jeremy Podeswa and Neve Fitchman. And, you know, so you get architects presenting to people who are always looking at the building like filmmakers, and but they gave us a vote of confidence to make the building we wanted to make, but they kept saying, we love the ballet school because it's very clear what it is. And so we pushed the large volumes through the facade. Essentially, 3 levels are very public with Luma and Canteen, and then 2 levels are office space. This space is actually an event space, Malaparte. And then we were thrown into another relationship with Peter Oliver and Michael Bonaccini, and we had to recompete to design Canteen and Luma, which we did. They made, I think, the right choice. And we worked with them, but they have all the catering rights for the whole building. So the new hybrid is really very entrepreneurial. It's not just mixed use. It's really about branding. It's really about marketing these units for 42-story tower. I asked the Daniels and Tom Dutton, how's it going? He said, very well. And I said, why? He said, well, we've sent out all of the expressions to all the people who go to the Toronto Film Festival. And he said, at this moment in time, we have 8,000 expressions for 400, expressions of interest for 400 units. That's a good hybrid. And then we wanted to make this transitional landscape between the tower and the base, set the tower as far back as we could, really kind of open up the stair that views, into the heart of King and Bay. And the section, which is kind of wild, but I love the section, and you see the transfer beams. There's a tower coming in, the tower's placed there to clear out the ground floor plan. This is all run by another group, Parkway from Philadelphia. We learned a lot about the business of how a deal gets put together, and that's part of architecture. And certainly someone like Jack Daniels knows that very, very well. So this is an impossible view of the building that Morris took, but I love it because this is the idea of the building. So each piece is sort of has its own identity within this real polyglot. It's messy. We call it the city of film. And then the interiors, we got value engineered. And so we turned to Margaret Priest. This was a wood wall, a zebra wood wall, and this was going to be copper. And Margaret Priest, who is a collaborator, and she's so efficient, picked 2 colors really for the building. And they're modern, there's a kind of French cinematic reference, but they're brilliant. And when we got Kellogg, when the group from Kellogg and the trustees came, they loved this building. The 2 buildings they liked the most were Kerner Hall and the Lightbox. I love this. This is messy. This is real world. This is popular. I mean, at any moment in time, one of our staff is in here eating. And then the cinema rooms were just rated very highly. I don't know if you saw that, the best cinema seats in the city, but our cinemas did well, and it's because Peter Smith was involved in shaping them. He did the Bader Theater, and the roof is a landscape, inspired by Villa Malaparte, at Alberto Libera's building where Contempt, Jean-Luc Godard filmed Contempt. I love that film. It makes a good roof. The ballet school, these are sketches about infilling, you're dealing with Havergal. This was the original Havergal College, designed by George Miller. This was Oliver Mowat's house, this Georgian cube. It's called Northfield because it stood in a north field north of the city of Toronto. This is Jarvis Street, one of the major streets of the aristocracy in the 19th century. Jack Diamond did the Betty Oliphant Theater. This is behind a Victorian building. Toronto is polyglot. It's very diversified. And the site was divided. This is where the CBC was, where Peter Zowski and Barbara Frum held court. It was called the Kremlin. This site has tremendous Canadian history on it. When the CBC moved down to Front Street, the City of Toronto had jurisdiction over this, and they didn't really know what to do with it. And Phil Goldsmith had done a master plan covering the whole site, and the city said, one thing, Phil, absolutely not. You can't have the whole site. So they subdivided the site and had an RFP for the residential development, Radio City. Howard Cohen got that site. Good choice. Peter Clues was picked to design the buildings. Good choice. And then they basically said, for the ballet school, you've got all the heritage issues, but we had Phil Goldsmith. And we then went on that tour to look at ballet schools, but we had our idea because this is very, very constrained. So this would be the academic program, which it is. The residence on Maitland Street is the residence, which Phil did. And then Shirley Mitchell Hall did that ballet bar. It's beautiful. We know exactly what Richard was talking about because he designed it, and it's remarkable. And we were really doing infill, and so what we did is we shaved off the back of the Georgian cube, and we developed the project of studios. Mavis Staines wanted natural light in every studio. Bob Sermon at the Canada Council now had the vision to deliver 12 dance studios, which are incredible. This is a photograph by Thomas Struth. There was a book written by Richard Sennett, and he had this picture, and he talked about these people, this family of old and young women and men, as buildings around a public square. This was the public square, and that kind of really had an impact on me. That, you know, I really stopped on it, and I thought about our project, and really put out the idea, knowing that other people are designing, knowing that there are these old buildings that are opaque and brick and solid, that we would actually produce something that would be almost an ensemble of characters on a stage. And unlike Phil's scheme, which actually had a studio here, we took all the studios and we put this studio up here. It used to be here. It was almost like a grand confort chair, big, thick wall, U-shaped building. And we said, absolutely not. We're not doing that. We're going to actually lower this to maintain the visual relationship between the two heritage buildings. It's George Miller who did that building, first Havigal building. And so we have the school entrance. You can still go in here to administration. There's a town square. You can get out on every single floor. You can get out on 3 levels of this building in that grade. Town square, fireplace, the back of the Georgian building. Where it was cut is the donor wall. The studios have a great section because it's all about observation. As a parent, I now spend most of my time looking through the glass. And the dance studios are pretty amazing. It's transparent because of this lighting detail. Again, Mitchell Hall was very all over this building. These are big, big projects with lots of thinking to do. And then the idea of the presence of dance in the city. The vertical campus, George Brown College, we just opened this. We did this with Stantec Architecture, and it escaped being an IO project, Infrastructure Ontario. It's right on the waterfront in the East Bay front, right on the park, Sherburne Commons, that Greg Smollenberg worked on with Jill Anholt. It's right beside Jack Diamond's Chorus Building. It's the future of the city on the waterfront. And what it was an industrial waterfront. It's all landfill with great buildings, great industrial aesthetics that I think most architects really respond to. And then Jill Anholt did this public art intervention, which is about filtering water, sustainability. There's a channel. And they came back to the design review committee and worked with Steve Teeple, who did the park pavilion, the skating, and so on. But this is fantastic, okay? This to me is pretty great. And then you have West 8 having won the international competition for the public landscape of continuity across the waterfront. So all this is built now. Jack Diamond's Chorus Building, which was creative workers on the waterfront, but really it's a buffer to Redpath Sugar Refinery, that you can't build residential over here unless you build these buildings as a buffer. We built this building for George Brown as phase 1. It's 350,000 square feet. It's premised on an idea of education and healthcare that's breaking down silos between nurses, hygienists, all the people who are caregivers within the healthcare system. We built a simple wall building, which is a flexible loft. We built a base that we believe was in the spirit of those pier buildings, and then we expressed the library and these classrooms that are interlocked all around an atrium that fuses this building with the park and creates what we call the learning landscape and a vertical landscape that you can walk 7 floors on. This was a very simple diagram we did, but it was really potent because it led to this section. We're working on the northern site right on Queens Quay. We actually have approval to bridge over at the 4th level. There's underground parking and connectivity below grade, but at grade is where we really want people to be. There's a stair system that allows you to walk all the way up to the top roof, where you then look out over the lake and Inner Harbor. So that's the learning landscape right there. This is the interlock of these lecture halls, and lecture halls that are in the public domain A lot of architects are working with that idea. I think what the difference is, we've created a continuous system of movement through the building, and we've rendered that section transparent to the elevation. Here's our building here. You've probably seen it. It has this is the figure that I think is really successful, because at one time it was a cube, and you wouldn't have had this kind of ripping away and figuration of the diagonals leading up to the terrace and down to the podium. You know, the bus, I was very concerned that you wouldn't be able to get there, so it wouldn't be part of the transit-oriented world that we're looking forward to, but they've worked out a scheme where the buses come from Union Station to the front door. 3,500 students commute into Toronto and come here. Most of the nurses in the city and dental hygienists are trained here. This is West 8. This is Greg Smallenberg. This is West 8. This is us, Jack Diamond. And then we were trying to make the program almost a kind of expression of the building itself, that it would be an X-ray. And this is facing east, which is the same orientation as the dance studio, so we knew we could do it. And then the learning landscape is a kind of invert of the lecture halls, except you're kind of out there and looking at the park. And it's very low budget, you know, considering everything, but it's very robust. It's concrete, and they have these cushions, these George Brown blue cushions, but you always see what's the park. The park is a kind of surface that you contemplate. It's the campus that they don't have, but it's a public park. The Rotman School, which you know, but I think the important thing is that the campus is centered at UC, and that St. George was a great divide. It was residential. In the post-war period, all of the science and engineering buildings were built. Today, the Rotman, that site was on the edge of the campus, is now at the heart of it. Roger has done great things in building that school up, so this was to double the size of the school. That's amazing. It's 150,000 square feet, and we're adding on to Eb Seidler's building. Across the street is Robarts. We have Ron Tom right beside us. Think of that challenge. It's very difficult to do that, St. Hilda's College, but you're looking at this whole block from Hoskin up to St. George, you know, and this block will be pretty intense when it's all done. This is what we got in the competition phase, and there were 2 heritage buildings. This is where the U of T radio station was. This is the Newman House, which is a fine, fine building. Ron Tom's building, probably the most beloved building in the city. Seidler's building, which was really low-rise infill, residential, zinc and brick, but ultimately very close, but it served the school very well around the Fleck Auditorium. They program it extremely well. This was the Sproat and Rolfe building. Sproat and Rolfe did Hart House, so they have pedigree. And this house is programmed for the PhD program. It was a competition with Seidler and Diamond. One of the key pieces of the competition was a signature event space that could take the entire first-year class, because we were growing that school. That's Roger's plan. And so where would you put it? You had 3 choices. You could put it below ground, like so many bad hotels in the city. You could put it at grade, where would block off the whole site. And the one place that I thought we should put it is up in the air, and we did. And then the section between the Fleck Auditorium, we did not want to duplicate the Fleck atrium. I like Jim Fleck, and there's so much great programming that goes on there. So we said, how do you add on an equal amount and not duplicate anything they have? How do you make an expanded world for the Rotman? And we said, you know, they've been living in a very good building for many years, and what they needed to do is to extrovert them. They had built a platform large enough that they could go up. We broke the rules, and they could actually speak to the street. And so there are institutes like the Martin Prosperity Institute or the Desautels Center for Integrative Thinking that are in this building. Here's Mars's film. Again, we set it's like a boutique office space, an academic loft that's set well back from the street. We foregrounded student life. This is all food, and made it very transparent. There's retractable seating up on the 2nd floor, and that room is subdividable. This is the PhD house. We took down the heritage building. We argued successfully with the city and heritage preservation that building could come down, because we showed them what we were proposing. These are acoustic wood surfaces over the lockers. And it's about really trying to create spaces between the classrooms that people really do enjoy. And then there's the hot tank, which was taken from Bruce Mau's first wave of branding for the Rotman for their publications and their word mark. And it was debated endlessly. It was wood. You know, people said we should get Holt Renfrew to sponsor it. But this stair is really quite a good stroke of design thinking because it receives people coming to the multi-purpose space from both the north and the south. These are their design studios that hover in that other atrium. We filled the second atrium with the stair. This is way up in the Martin Prosperity Institute, where we stack the mechanical in order to get a really super high ceiling and an outdoor courtyard. There's the outdoor courtyard. We call it the Florida room. And then there are layers of space, but believe me, one of the best parts of the campus is in the roof line, where you just start to clear the Victorian silhouettes of buildings and to really look at, you know, most people think it looks like a peacock, the Robarts Library, but it's part of a significant landscape, and it certainly is, you know, one of the big resources that this university has as a research university. Green roofs. There's the Sproat and Rolfe building. All the PhD programs are in that building, and they like it because it has a sense of identity. And it's all about walking. There was a good piece in Globe and Mail about well-being and walking and urban design. An American researcher basically has proven what we already know. Again, Paulo Rocha, graduate of this school, is a fantastic architect. Bridgepoint is very complicated, and I only want to say that we're willing to roll up our sleeves and get involved with Infrastructure Ontario. We were the design compliance firm. Look at this, with Stantec, who do healthcare. We who do not much healthcare, except I think the two significant healthcare projects, this and CAMH. And then you have HDR from the States, Diamond Schmidt. They won it on the proponent side with plenary and PCL. So we set the template. We worked for 2 years to design Bridgepoint Hospital and worked closely with the hospital and got all their approvals. We built on an urban design plan. Here it is, site of the Don Jail, the most visited building and doors open. And the jail is outside the city. It was on the other side of the valley. It was out of law, and it's a great building. William Thomas. How do I know that? Robert Hill. There's the half-round building that all my colleagues, Martin Lee Faber and Kathy Naismith, wanted to be maintained as an example of modern architecture. It's actually a terrible building, low ceilings, very difficult to actually produce the care program that Bridgepoint is dealing with, which is for people who have chronic, complex diseases. When you are disabled, you're often depressed, and you're a smoker too, probably. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that, you know, the busiest part of the hospital is the shop that repairs wheelchairs. It's an amazing place, but in our scheme, it was an idea about transforming a site which was about incarceration into something else. This was Urban Strategies Plan. They deserve a lot of credit. This was our design scheme linked to the Don Jail, and we opened up the public square behind the Don Jail so it was double-fronted. Green roofs and a connection to the city, and the idea of vertical neighborhoods of healthcare. The fenestration pattern where people could actually stand at the window and see the sky and the ground, but from every bed you would have a horizontal view of the panorama that the Don Valley affords you. The great building by William Thomas, you know, the great D-shaped court, which we'll all get to see soon when this building opens. The section through it, this will be a center for major healthcare announcements and research and public interface. The building on the valley, and then heritage. I've got to really move this, guys. Okay, James Stewart Center for James Stewart, the Integral House client. This is in Hamilton, my hometown, and we took a 1929 collegiate Gothic building and pretty much gutted it to make it for the Department of Mathematics, which is one of the McMaster's very strong programs. So you get this interplay of a very modern, contemporary interior within, a tweed suit. We did the Canadian Museum of Nature. I worked on this for 10 years. It's on the axis of Metcalfe, and it was the federal government's idea to expand as a satellite the federal presence into the neighborhoods of Ottawa. And they had David Ewart, who was Canada's first public works architect, designed the original building. It was opened in 1910. It's a Beaux-Arts classical Scottish baronial wings and halls, de-apsoidal piece, very strong atrium, and a tower. And the tower was originally designed like this. He got value engineered, and it looked like this. But as soon as the building opened, it began to settle because Ottawa is in a seismic zone, but it has bad soils, laid to clay, and has a phenomenon called liquefaction. So the government asked him to behead the tower, and it stood like this for 100 years. This was the Metcalfe axis. This is what we built. We argued with Fibro that our structural glass building, which was more in the spirit of the Neo-Gothic, or as much in the spirit of the Neo-Gothic as Ewart's stone building. And we placed a public stair that connects the second, third, and fourth floor in it. Ewart's stair only connected the ground and second. The upper floors were conservation and administration, and we called it the Lantern. We gained traction on this in Ottawa when we stopped calling it the Tower. And the building engineered by Halsall is extraordinary because we had to basically create a structure that would hang the thing, not bear any load on the stump of David Ewart's tower. My argument for this was always that people saw this building as an icon, but they never really experienced the fabric and the materiality of the building, so that all of our interventions are to keep people very close to the building. You walk against the walls of the building, you see it, you see the mortar, you see the color of the steel, you see the beauty of the screening. And then I had a moment with at the Queen's visit, which was you wait 3 hours for 3 minutes, and have this guy leaning over me. And I had someone from Scotland Yard within 3 meters for 3 hours. But she liked it because it's called the Queen's Tower, because the original tower was named after her great-grandmother. And then just to verify it, we had a photographer shoot from an apartment building to make sure that we captured the moment. At Princeton, we got to the short list because of the Museum of Nature, the Gardiner Museum, and Hamilton Hall. And Princeton's an amazing place. It's just an amazing place. That's all I can say. They have a sustainability policy that is comprehensive. They have a programming and planning and design review process which is really involving and really thorough. Like I must say that it's extraordinary. And it is, not only the collegiate Gothic, but they have contemporary works by significant architects all over Maneo. Frank Gehry has a building there. Todd Williams is doing a building with Billy Sien. Stephen Hall is doing a building, and somehow, because of those buildings we did, we were selected to do the renovation of the Frick labs for chemistry. They got a new building by Michael Hopkins, and so they're trying to create the Prospect Avenue, William Street neighborhood of humanities and social sciences, and of course Yamasaki's building, which is the Woodrow Wilson Center, and Scudder Plaza are here. This is Shapiro Walk, named after one of the presidents. It leads to the classroom building, McCosh, the chapel, and to the library. I mean, it's very, very incredible. Like, this is Nassau Street, which is a town gown seam. One of the things we're working with Michael Van Valkenburg, who's doing lots of work in Toronto, to transform this part of the campus, to open it up to the other buildings in the humanities, and to actually take down the wall of Scudder. The entrance with the Beatrix Ferrand landscape is quite elegant and beautiful. It's being restored. The plan, in a way, it's very typical. Guess what? It's rooms and halls and corridors, but it's also taking out a lecture auditorium that was really terrible and infilling a south-facing courtyard to allow us to bridge to Scudder. So it's got two major departments, one a little more major than the other. One is the Department of Economics, with Nobel Prize winners Shirley and David Justin have interfaced with them, and also international initiatives who are on this side who want to be extroverted, okay? So the two big moves are an interior atrium and exterior atrium, and then working with Michael van Valkenburg to repair the landscape, to open it up, to connect the worlds together. And we're proposing to build 3 glass meeting rooms on the roof of the original building. And they look towards McCosh and to the chapel. This is what it's like inside. You come through, this is our rendering. We gutted the first atrium, we filled it in, we're floating a meeting room for economics. There's a living room, there's a stair. They want it to be very focused and very Princeton. And then we're layering back, this is the entrance out to Washington Road, but there's a heritage room behind this wall, and it's very, very complex. It's debated a lot, as you can imagine, at Princeton, and seen by a lot of people. What we're doing is trying to strengthen the movement systems through the length of the building, and these are stone-clad structure. And then the facade, which is south-facing and has very thin stone louvers like the Gardiner, and has accessibility off of Scudder. It floats up and above the lane. This was a 1960s wing, which is plainer than obviously the Neo-Gothic building. Payette did some work on that. We're taking it away. We're actually stripping an elevation. We're creating new atrium space that is really much more public than the one that economics is focused on. Has an elevator, has an interconnecting stair, and it has an incredible floating classroom looking out to the Magnolias and to the Woodrow Wilson School, where there are people who come from both sides of the building up and meet in there, and there's food. Climate responsive design is Manitoba Hydro. It is the exemplar of the way the world should be, but isn't. And it maximizes passive solar and wind energy and geothermal. We are outperforming our model. You know, it is probably minus 40 out there. It's very, very cold. But what it does have is sunshine. And it has steady south wind. Our target was 60%. We're now clocking in, and they believe they're going to push to 70% energy. We're the only ones who are on schedule for the 2030 challenge. We're clocking in at 86 kilowatt hours per square meter. You know, in the sustainable world, unless you're under 100, you don't count. And we got a LEED platinum, although we were shooting for a LEED gold. And the system, it's like a machine that breathes with geothermal. 400 feet, you know, drilling into the ground, 280 holes. The atriums face due south. It's a stack of, guess what, 3-story neighborhoods of work, academic work. Has Tyndall stone on the base to adjust to the city. Has windows that open that are kind of active nature in the city. It has visible humidification and dehumidification in the south-facing atriums. So these are strands of mylar that go 6 floors, and they provide all the humidification for dry air that's coming in today. And they also are chilled in the summer, so they dehumidify, you know, the really moist air in the summer. Okay, they're used for yoga. They're used as big sort of breakout areas for people working. And at the north end, where we're drawing the air through the building with a solar chimney, there are gathering spaces where you can see the green roof below, but also you can see Portage, Maine. This is a gallery right through the base of the West Loft, which is a public meeting room and a public performance area. The South Park on the transit connector, Graham corridor, is a real gathering spot because it's facing south, and it's protected by this canopy, which deals with the downdrafts off the south-facing facade. There's been a lot written and published on this. And back home on the conflict front, we're making the new home for the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, and it'll be a very sustainable building. Everything we learned, slightly different. It's right behind Rogers on Isabel and Huntley. It's low. We had to persuade Kyle Ray that it was even possible. It has rainwater collection. It has windows that open. It has exterior solar shading. It's a good little office building, and it's nearing completion. Last project, finally. We won, and the right, I guess, to develop the village for the Pan Am, Pan Parapan Games which will be in Toronto in June of 2015. And we're working for Larry Tannenbaum, Kilmer Van Nostrand, and we're working for Michael Cooper from Dundee Real Estate. And they're a very powerful team. It's being built out by Ledcor and Ellis Don, and we're working in joint venture with Architects Alliance. This is the project that we always wanted to do in this city, to demonstrate how to build something at a precinct scale all at once. It's a kind of instant city. And then we asked Rene Daou and David Miller to join us because of the different components. This is an Infrastructure Ontario design, build, finance, manage project. It's at the east end of Front Street. Michael Van Valkenburg's doing the park. Bridgepoint is up here. This is all the mouth of the Lower Don. George Brown is over here. There's a lot going on down in this part of the city. A Porter shot. There's Van Valkenburg's flood control topography for the 100-year flood. This is all being laid out. The subdivision plan was laid out by UDA from Pittsburgh, and Greg Smallenberg did all the landscaping of the public realm. It was a Carolinian forest. It was a site of 19th century recreation. It was an industrial site. It's all landfill. Railways usurped that land and came into Union Station. This is what we were given, these kind of what we call the loaves of bread that these are the building envelopes. It's the mechanism that Waterfront Toronto used to control development. It's not density. So this is the Canary Restaurant. This is Front Street. This is Cherry Street. This is the lower Bayview Crescent on Michael Van Valkenburg's park. And what's interesting is that the public space on Front Street is asymmetrically disposed to the north side. Don Schmidt actually recommended it. We voted for it. He said it would get the best light, and it produced a linear kind of landscape. So these were diagrams of what can we add to that plan of subdivision. Renee was involved. We were looking for more finer ways of moving through the blocks. We were looking at trying to enhance the gateway potential of the Canary and this CNR building, which is a brick building. They're the only remnants of that whole era of building. And we were looking at trying to create diversity within the format of Toronto the Good. And so Architects Alliance is doing this building and this building. We are doing this building and this building. Rene Daou is doing two buildings here, which are going to be converted to rental. So the proposition is you build the village for 8,000 athletes and I think 2,600 parapan athletes, and you pre-sell these units to the market, and some of the sites have destined for George Brown College as a residence and for agencies for affordable rental. So these two blocks here will be affordable rental and student housing. This one's really innovative. It's a joint venture between MJM and Architects Alliance. So MJM is doing it's called the Polyclinic for all the athletes, but it's an easy conversion into a YMCA. And athletes housing is an easy conversion into student housing. It's less easy into condominiums, but it's doable. Vancouver did it, but we're doing it, I think, in a slightly different way. You know, site plan. This building was these two were Enrique Norton, who's not on the team for very complicated reasons. But we had what we thought was a really interesting, you know, architects wouldn't design two buildings beside each other. But these two blocks were very typical. AA did this block, we did this block, so we'd be, you know, side by side, and we would be not working on each other's buildings, but while we were working on them, we were talking to each other an awful lot. And I think that's the kind of coordination that you actually need to make an urban fabric. This is all dining hall stuff. The Canary will become a kind of social club and an icon, I think. It's called the Canary District. So these are the dining tents. You can have a casual, intimate meal with 8,000 people in these tents.
We're in the middle of an era of exciting research on cities. Recent studies show that when people come together in urban areas, they become much more productive. The science is putting the math behind Jane Jacobs' theories that pedestrian-scaled neighborhoods facilitate the free flow of information between city dwellings. What we're seeing is that cities help people to meet and mix ideas. They call it even friction. The resulting exchange has been proven to increase income, innovation, and even patents by about 15%. The result of all that bumping into one another is that all great cities are a little uncomfortable, but they don't have to be. In fact, the new research suggests that the true purpose of urban planning is to find ways to minimize urban stress while maximizing our interactions. City building, then, is beautiful design and tightly managed resources, but it's so much more. It's about designing conditions to encourage interaction and connection. It's about people, not infrastructure. We have designed the Pan Am Village for people. In the short term, we have designed a community that will quickly attract buyers because of its diversity and value. In the long term, we have designed a community with the lasting vitality that will actually increase innovation for Toronto. We have assembled a team that has all the experience we need to make sure this project happens on time. We have assembled a team with unique experience in learning for a clear head start out of the gates. We have assembled a team that is solid and diverse, that has drawn together a compelling plan and has the chemistry to deliver. We have assembled a team with a clear understanding of the local market and a strategy for rapid sale. The Athletes' Village is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Toronto. It's historic land at the heart of the city that will play host to the people from around the world during the Pan Am and Para-Pan American Games. It's a place that will easily attract new residents and become home for them once the games are done. And it's a place that will become a model for urban living for the future generations. We're building a place that people will get on a plane from all around the world to come see. We're building a place that we'll be proud to tell our children and grandchildren we were a part of. We're building Toronto's next great neighborhood.
So if you go down there, you'll see a lot of cranes. It's really going quickly. Andrew Dyke and Adam Feldman are leading that team, and it is high speed. This is a little footnote. When the Prince came, I've got this thing with the royalty, and they let me look over their shoulders, and I think it was an explanation of Silva Cell, something I know a lot about landscape. No, they were. Anyways, it was very interesting because he was interested in this project. He actually got it. These are the strategies. Thank you very much.
Anybody have a question they'd like to ask?
Hi there, George Warner, artist, filmmaker. Any implications regarding cycle traffic? Like, are you incorporating anything in that regard when it comes to traffic within the city for bicycles?
Well, Shirley and I were working on the ballet school when, we have one regime come in and actually take out a lane of parking, make everybody in Rosedale crazy, and put in bike lanes. Another regime comes in, puts the lane down the middle. I mean, it's really an issue, and I think that, needs to be solved, because read the piece in the Globe today. It was really, really good. It was about everything we already know, which you know, which is that if you're cities like Copenhagen, where bicycles are really the best way to get around, or Berlin, where I've done a lot of work, where a lot of people take transit or bicycles or they walk. Okay, it's just a different way of life. We're living on the same planet, and a lot of people are living differently. They're living smarter. He mentions mixed use, which is Jane Jacobs' key strategy. It should be mixed use, and I think that's before us. So we need to, your generation, because somebody's got to step up and actually, make the bold plan. Jack Layton tried to do it, and there are other people who are very concerned with it. It's not something that's going to go away. And when you see, we're working at the Bay Adelaide Centre for Deloitte, and the number of bicycles that they have, and how we're managing those bicycles and where they're going to be within, it's a huge project. There are a lot of bicycles, and people have to get downtown. If you go to cities like Berlin, somebody thought about this a long time ago, and what I love about it is the clear hierarchy of pedestrians, slow-moving, fast-moving, bicycles, parking, traffic. They have as many layers as we have. It's having, we've had a lot of development, a lot of growth, and not a lot of really careful thinking about, as European cities have. One of my views is that, Europe was shocked in the 1970s, by the oil embargo, and it took all of those countries about 15 years to develop their national policies on how to build cities, make buildings, deal with infrastructure, transportation, and put into place real plans that would become part of the reconstruction of Berlin, or part of the making of all those Scandinavian cities, and rethinking everything. And we are so far behind, and it has to do with the way our democracy is structured, and how we can't come together, how the United States can't get it figured out. Obama, good luck. He's said that, the sustainability will be, a major platform. Canada, we're not doing so well. There was a world ranking last year of 13 countries, and we were 12th. The UK was number one. That was really interesting. We were behind the Americans. We think we are so smart. We're not. And I just think that people have to get down to business and actually concentrate on doing something, and kind of almost taking it out of, it'll always be in the political forum, but I think the time is ripe now to actually make change. I've seen visible change. It has to do with, really, the persuasion of the public, and the ability to lobby at City Hall, and the ability to, speak publicly on issues and not be afraid. So, I don't see where the plan forward is going to be. I do know that Shirley and I are working on a plan with some interesting architects, where the only hope they have is if they have a really strong idea of bicycling in the city to make that development actually work.
The reason why I mention that is I have a project called Skyway, which is an above ground.
We may need you.
Highway.
We may need you.
I just need people to help me.
Well, we may need you.
Okay.
We may need that, because that's come up. It would be an independent system, which some people shudder at. They said, oh no more, overhead. But you may need something like that to get over the Don River. Right. Okay.
Manitoba Hydro is a hugely successful green building. Do you advocate green, or do you wait for your clients to ask for a green building?
We do, and we know through that experience what it takes, and the level of commitment, the understanding. We were basically being directed by, a team of engineers for Hydro who really had done a lot of homework. What's amazing to me is that the business case the real business case, which is a long-term business case. I mean, the business case for Manitoba Hydro was a 40-year business plan that used a net present value model to show the consequences of not making this building and to running their company out of 14 suburban buildings around Winnipeg. Someone was smart enough to get a whole board of, Crown Corporation to understand that. I think most people don't understand that. I think the development industry, green is something that is a marketing tool. I mean, and LEED is criticized all the time. I mean, the real goals are energy reduction and to really think about the climate, be passive. I think the Elementary Teachers Federation is going to be a very good building. I think we're shooting for a 60% reduction in energy consumption. I remember we went out to their annual convention. Where was it, in Thunder Bay or something like that? And I got up in front of all these teachers. It's a great moment when you get all the elementary teachers, people that I dealt with in the public school system. And I said to them, if not you, who do you think can point the future to a sustainable world? And they believed me. They took the challenge, So you need to challenge people. I think Waterfront Toronto understands this. I think the city does a little bit. But I think you need exemplars, you need grassroots. But we don't have it. We do not have a wave of culture because the cost of energy is not such as it was in Europe, where it threatened everybody. It scared the daylights out of people. And so, I look at the German economy, and that's the economy I thought United States would have, where through design and engineering, through really thinking about alternative energies and making vehicles that are high performing, and it's amazing. It's amazing. They've got other issues, But the issue that I think we in this room should be focused on is the relationship between design and the world of the future, and think harder. And that's what you've got, the fact that you have landscape and architecture, urbanism, all of that, and hopefully art, very important in this. It's not some passive byproduct or sideline, it's a driver. And I think sophisticated, mature cultures understand this, and so it's a false, I don't think anybody in Europe talks about making a sustainable building. I really don't. It's all encoded in law. You get out there and, they've got other issues, so big issues. But I think we have an opportunity that's very, very big, and I never thought I'd be in a situation, but the future is in your hands, and I think you have a lot to say on the matter, more than we do.